Well, I want to welcome you today to my presentation on what approach are we taking to engage and equip Gen Z. I will pose a lot of questions. I hope to engage you in activities, and be honest, I like to hear verbal responses. So I realize that one approach to Gen Z is not going to fit all people in all situations, but I think a little bit of knowledge can help us decipher what we can use and how we might tweak some of the ideas we'll talk about here to our own particular circumstances. So I don't know where you are on the generational chart, um, but I think most of you can relate to my situation. My research of Gen Z came out of seeing a difference in my students in the classroom. Just a different approach in how they engaged in classroom activities, how they thought, how they spoke. I was just seeing a big difference. And this kind of culminated for me when I was on a mission trip to Calgary with a group of college students, and I realized I wasn't really following the conversation. There was a part of me that felt really old and out of touch, and I was awakened to the possibility that I might need to approach my communication differently with these students. So I began to take notes on things I didn't understand. I'm still taking notes every single day in my efforts to navigate communicating with a different generation. It might just be that I will never be able to communicate with them. I don't know, but I haven't given up hope yet. I'm still trying to navigate how to communicate. So, I had a professor in college that would always try to find a cartoon if she could to try to capture what she was talking about, her topic for the day. And so here is mine on Gen Z. Gen Z, oh, the places you'll go. Me and my iPhone will travel the earth, Paris and London, and a city named Perth. I'll tweet from New Zealand and Venice, perhaps, not once looking up from my iPhone and apps. Now, I'm picking on Gen Z with this cartoon, but I think all of us can relate to it, and perhaps some of us are becoming members of Gen Z, where we're so used to looking at our phone and our apps, we're not engaging with the world around us. Um, that's just a challenge. And this next slide is a quote from Generation Z Unfiltered that resonates well with me. In many ways, I feel like we adults have a blockbuster brand of leadership while Gen Z is growing up in a Netflix world. And I think it's important for us to realize that there are generational differences. There's pros and cons to every generation, but there is a difference. And if we don't adjust our methodologies in our organizations, we aren't going to be as effective as we could be. We're not going to have the success that I think we could have if we don't adjust our thinking. So let me give you a little information about myself. My name is Julie Powell. I teach in the Physical Education, Wellness, and Sport Department at Union University. So I come to you as a professor attempting to understand, engage, and connect with her students who are mostly Gen Z at the current time. I'm a blogger who is researching what it means to embrace personal and professional success as a part of helping to equip emerging generations. And you will see the link to my blog there in case you have any interest in that. And I'm also a mentor that's trying to navigate the roads to help coaching younger professionals. Right now, I am mentoring a millennial, but I'm also mentoring Gen Z. So just trying to help them and myself navigate the relationships involved in multi-generational workplaces and organizations. I'm sharing this information with you because I'm on a journey to find answers. I'm hoping to offer courses maybe at some point that may bridge the gap between education and employment. And I know there is one coming out of school and going into the workforce, trying to help prepare them for you guys. And so I'm going to ask, are you ready to explore some options for success? Let me hear you say aloud, yes, I am. All right, so let's get going. So, what approach are we taking to engage and equip Gen Z? You might begin to formulate some ideas in your mind. Today, I want to focus on communication and connection. I do feel like there are a lot of threads to equipping and engaging. I really think it goes in a lot of different directions, and I could probably share with you multiple times and have different threads to talk about each time. But today I'm going to focus on communication and connection. That if we focus on these two areas, we might find an approach that works for us. So as this research has gone on, I have found a lot of wonderful resources, and I put up here my current favorite three because they do change. The more I read, the more research that comes out as we're learning about Gen Z, and they are now moving into the workforce more and more. We learn more as we collect data and gain information and research. So my favorite three right now are The Remix by Lindsay Pollock, and she shares about what multi-generational workplaces are going to look like. How do we mix the old with the new? How do we take the good of both generations and mix those together? Just like a song remix, that's her approach. The second is Gen Z Unfiltered, and anything you read by Tim Elmore and Andrew McPeak on generational theory is just amazing. I started with them when they started researching millennials, and they have continued that wonderful research and depth of information and really caring about what generations become and how do we equip them to find success. Anything by him, Elmore, and now Andrew McPeak. But they share a ton of research, and they specifically address 9 challenges that this generation will face. And then my third favorite is the Gen Z effect. And what I really like about the Gen Z effect is that it encourages us to embrace the strengths that this generation has to offer. A lot of times we have a tendency to focus on the negatives, what things need to be fixed, when we need to be focusing on what the strengths, how can we get the most out of this generation? Well, one of the things that is emerging out of this current research is the fact that we are probably going to start having what we call mini generations, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I think the pandemic that we are living through right now is going to be a defining line between those born before and after. And does anyone argue that we have seen a change in our society, in our culture, as a result of this pandemic? We've had to change. So I think it's a perfect example of how shared experiences within a generation mold our behavior. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on today. By understanding Gen Z, we are able to move forward in communicating and connecting, which ultimately allows us to equip and engage. So my favorite quote from the Gen Z effect is this one right here. Gen Z is a set of behaviors and attitudes about the way the world works. You can be born into it, or you can choose to be a part of it. The Gen Z effect is what happens when the simplicity and affordability of technology unites generations more than it divides them. So I don't know about you, but I'm going to choose to be a part of Generation Z. I wasn't born into it. I am a Gen Xer. But I am going to embrace this generation and do what I can to try to help them succeed. So, if you are unfamiliar with Gen Z generational theory and why we're talking about Gen Z, let me just give you a little bit of a background. Generational theory um, is a look at the things that happen, shared experiences within a society that kind of impact who that generation becomes. We have typically seen here in America 20-year segments of generational theory. Um, that is now changing. As I mentioned, we're now going to have what I would consider micro generations, or those that we call cuspers, people who are maybe on the edge of one generation to the other and maybe feel like they connect better with one or the other. But I chose these three in particular to kind of look at because these are the majority of those that are in the workplace right now. Not eliminating the other, but just seeing that things that have happened during their lifespan, during their formative years, are going to impact the behavior they have for me as college students, for you as employees in the workplace. So one of the quotes in Remix by Lindsay Pollock has to do with the fact that they are looking, most organizations are looking for someone age 22 to 26 with 30 years of experience. I mean, it's true. We want the young, the innovation, the creativity, the thinking outside the box, but we also need that grounded truth of experience and just life circumstances. Um, she calls the secret sauce the strategy that she has observed again and again across different types of industries involves a combination of keeping the best, the classic workplace practices of the past, while simultaneously embracing more modern and innovative approaches to work. It mixes the old and the new in positive ways. So the best way she has found to describe this is through music, through the remix. So she encourages us to choose to become a remixer, to take the best and put those together. And I am going to add in one more person in here, one more silhouette, because I do think we are going to see, as careers go longer and longer, people living longer and longer, people are working longer, or even once they retire from one career, they may be looking at an encore career. So I think we're even going to see more generations working together than we even have today. Okay, so I've given you some information on Gen Z. We need to delve a little bit further about who they are. What are their characteristics? What are their experiences that have formed the kind of workers they are going to become? So I would like for us to engage in an activity, and let's see what your experiences are. So in front of you, you have a Post-it note, a particular color Post-it note, and we're going to do an activity that I call perspective taking. And so I'm going to give you, based on the color of your Post-it, a perspective to take, and you're going to write some descriptors for Gen Z based on that perspective. So if you have pink or blue, you're going to describe how Gen Zers would describe themselves. Okay, pink or blue, what words would Gen Zers use to describe themselves? If you're green or orange, you're going to take the perspective of employers. What would employers, how would they describe Gen Z? And if you have a yellow Post-it note, parents, how would parents describe Gen Z? So if you would take just a second, if you're watching this video, pause, and I encourage you to write those things down. All right, welcome back. So let's take a look at what you wrote down for your Gen Z characteristics. Somebody give me what a parent would say. Okay, how about an employer? How about a Gen Zer themselves? Okay, do we see some similarities? I might encourage you to even do what we call a think, pair, share. Share with your neighbor. Do you have any that are in common, or are they all different? Okay, well, I'm going to give you what research says. I don't think any of us would argue that they are digital natives. Technology is just a part of their lives. It's been there since they've existed. A lot of them consider themselves independent learners. They spend a lot of time on devices. We see shortening attention spans, not only in Gen Z, it's happening to all of us, but as a result of the devices we're on. One I'd like to highlight the most has to do with this generation prefers the use of images to words. And this is hard for me because I like words. I'm a visual person too. I'm actually a kinesthetic learner, but this is something I have had to change, and it has changed my approach to my classes as well. If I search for something on the internet, I typically want to read about it. I don't want to watch a video. I don't want to see, I want to read about it. But that is the opposite of what most of this generation is doing. They're used to short clips of video. And many would rather give up their pinky finger than their cell phone. So we can't argue that devices, the invention of the smartphone has impacted this generation. The 2008 recession has impacted this generation. Um, I work with what I call emerging adults, those college students. Um, and I have had to accept, not in a derogatory way, but to accept that today's 19-year-old is the equivalent to a 15-year-old from my generation. And this has more to do with the fact that they have not had the same life experiences at 19 that I had at 19. I started working at 15. Before I even had a driver's license, I had jobs. I earned income. I had to learn how to deal with those financial things. The day I turned 16, I got my driver's license because I was already working and people were having to take me to work, and it was an inconvenience. So just if I think about the fact that Gen Z is delaying certain milestones that were in the past happened earlier. Some of these are good, some of them are bad, but it's just the reality of who we are dealing with. So, a lot of what I think this also means, they've had far less life experiences and they have had less time or fewer opportunities to develop what we call soft skills, what a colleague of mine likes to call essential skills, and that is going to impact the communication aspect with Gen Z in a great way. So here is, um, if you read anything from Elmore and McPeak, you will see how they like to use acronyms to help us remember things. So for them to describe how Gen Z engages with the world, they use the PROVE acronym. They want to solve real world problems. They like to connect and spar with others while learning, which means they don't want to sit in a classroom and listen to me talk. They want to determine their own course on how they reach their goal. And as long as the end result is the same, that can cause some conflict. Um, Visual, again, I've already mentioned that, and experience, I have had to switch a lot of my things to experiential learning rather than sitting and listening. And that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. Okay, so for me, I mentioned in my opening story, I felt like I did not speak their language. The communication styles they have and their expectations are very different than what mine were at their same age. So let's have a little fun with this, and see if you can help me navigate communicating with Gen Z. I don't necessarily understand their language, and some of it I will choose not to use because it just comes across as phony. But I do need to understand the language that is being used to some degree. even if I don't understand it all, if that makes sense. So let's see if you know what these terms or phrases mean. And if you know, feel free to raise your hand and share what that is. Anybody know what phubbing means? Ghosting, crunchy, tea, big facts, or bougie? You know what those mean? Okay, hopefully you do. My favorite little video on being bougie is this little girl right here. I think she was on Ellen. Um, let me see if this will play. Oh, it doesn't look like it's going to work. Okay, but I would love to share that with you just because it's a really fun approach. All right, so let's look at some visuals. They have their own language. They can speak through emojis. I don't need to be fluent in the language, but I do need to be able to communicate. So let's see if you can guess some of these. You might want to take a guess. Not the brightest bulb. That was gold. Don't cry over spilled milk. Okay, so I may have to go look some of these emojis up to try to understand what Gen Z is communicating with each other and maybe even to me, but how we communicate with Gen Z is going to become important. So let me give you right now some best practices for communication, engaging, and equipping Gen Z. First and foremost is frequent feedback. And these are challenges because of the systems we have in place in our organizations have largely been in place since the industrial age. They were designed for efficiency. They are typically a hierarchy where things go through a process. They're bureaucratic, where things are slow, and that's just not going to be the way the world is going to function with Gen Z. It's just not. So even if they have positive annual reviews, it feels stale if those are months old. If that process needs to be more frequent. Um, Sad thing is, most of our managers today, and I will hold you guys to be the exception to that because you are sitting in training right now, aren't even given instruction on how to conduct a performance review. We just have a tendency to copy what has been modeled for us, whether that is the best practice or not. Even older generations want more feedback. And they've just kind of accepted that they're not going to get it, that it wasn't going to exist in their organization. But all of these things work with all generations. I'm focusing on Gen Z because that's what I'm researching, but all of these are very effective with every generation you have working for you. I haven't read it yet, but there's a book by Ken Blanchard and Spencer Johnson called The 1 Minute Manager that focuses on 1 minute praise and then 1 minute correction. So I'm going to look into that. I would also encourage peer feedback. It doesn't always have to come from you, the leader or the manager. I would encourage you to consider your feedback language. I have read a great book called Leadership is Language by Daniel Marquette, and he talks about observation over judgment and comparing how we use words and the impact that those words can have. So let me give you this example. He says, compare you performed poorly with your performance was poor. One way to tilt towards observation over judgment is to opt for nouns over verbs, performance instead of performed when discussing a dicey subject. This small shift in language can be powerful, especially when emotions are running high. So just thinking about the words we use. All right, someone's late to a meeting again. I noticed you were late for the meeting and that's unprofessional. Versus, what is in the way of being on time to the meeting? So even thinking about our language in the feedback, and this is a struggle for me because my feedback in my grading is looking for the things that are missing. I kind of approach it the way I do nutrition, and this has been a real struggle for me, and I'm trying this. And there is even recent research that says the ratio of positive to negative comments needs to be 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. And I can tell you mine is in the opposite direction. And I don't know how I'm going to change it, but I am going to try. Okay, another best practice for Gen Z involves checklist, very explicit instructions. Again, we are all reducing our attention spans because of the availability of information and things that we have. They don't necessarily remember things that they feel that they can look up. So checklist provides them the reminders of what they need to be doing. So back to my mission trip in Canada, we had a group of Gen Zers that were there all summer long, but they had come to help us with a soccer camp. The leader of the camp told them to just go help. That was the amount of instructions they were given in my presence. They may have been given more detailed instructions for you, but it was go help. Well, that's not going to be effective with Gen Z. What I had to do was tell them how to help, where they needed to go, where they needed to stand, and how they could help the person on the field they were going to help. I had to give them very detailed instructions. So, moving on to modes of communication, I would encourage you to share your preferred mode, but also ask them theirs. You may not be able to accommodate their preferred mode of communication, but I think asking demonstrates that you care about their preferences. I try to share this with my students. I prefer email. It is not as much as a disruption. I can address things in a timely manner. I try to be responsive, but that's my preferred mode. So if they are going to communicate with me, that's where they should try first. I also think that we need to have a digital philosophy. That's a personal philosophy, and that may be a department, an organizational philosophy of what is acceptable use, the appropriate use of devices in the professional setting. We also have to determine that for ourselves of when we are going to let devices change our communication or interrupt our communication or not. And I haven't had time to research this, but recently I read about feedback apps, ways to give feedback, peer feedback, managerial feedback, multi-level feedback, and I'm going to try to find some of those and investigate how those work. And then the last best practice for Gen Z is coaching. In Remix, Lindsay Pollock says the style of leadership most effective in getting the best results from all generations is to be a coach. Coach is guide and support as opposed to command and control. And I realize this may not work in all situations, but I am finding that my students respond better when I guide them through learning something rather than telling them what they need to do. Sometimes it helps for us to brainstorm together. So coaches are typically agents of change. They actually embrace a growth mindset or an improved mindset. I think it helps with Gen Z's need to feel like they belong to something. They want to be mentored. And so that approach seems to work better with them than maybe some methods of the past. And I say the best way to take these approach to Gen Z is we model what we value. So what they see modeled in us is what they are going to repeat. So one more way just to say this, Elmore and McPeak call this essential ingredients. They use the IDEA acronym. By providing instructions through verbal explanations and conversations, they gain knowledge and understanding. When we give them demonstrate real examples, they develop confidence and a vision of how they can implement those things. And then back to the experience, the experiential learning, they develop their skills and abilities. And then assessment, by giving them frequent feedback, they gain wisdom and perspective. So, with Gen Z, how are we connecting with them? For me, I'm trying to do as much as I can learn by doing, because that is the approach that all research is showing is most effective with them. You've got to show them, don't tell them. So they like to work through examples. And one of the ways I have tried to embrace the doing along with the visual aspect of what they like is the approach of saying, is it Instagrammable? You know, the things I'm doing, are they fun and engaging them to where they would want to post a photo about it? So I was sharing this with a colleague of mine. Well, actually, she was telling me about her approach to teaching a new class, and she thought, I want to make it as relevant as I can. So this freshman biology class, they were talking about cicadas. So students came in and were posting pictures to her and sending them to her. So here we have something they were learning about in class, and they made the connection between class and real life. They enjoyed the learning that they were doing, and she posted a photo. So that's what it means. So I asked her, can I use that? Okay. So another approach, I think, is that we have to change our mindset. We're switching things from prove to improve, from performance-based to growth-based. And I know that some areas that's not as effective, but I hope in your leadership that that will be something that you can focus on. And again, for me, it was a change in mindset from lectures and listening to movement and images. And you guys are going to get an example of that here in a second. So, are simulations an option? Can you create real life scenarios that will help students understand what is going on? Thankfully, I have found some sports and entertainment simulations that allow my sport management students to see what happens when they make specific decisions. They'll be given a goal, and the decisions they make show how they reach that goal or fail to reach that goal. And it's okay for them to fail. Because I want them to fail now while they've got experts around to ask, and not fail when they get to your level and fail in their working. So my students have commented that they enjoy these. I don't think they're necessarily Instagrammable, but they are a process towards trying to gamify content, give real life scenarios, and help them learn how to make decisions. It's a step, I think. All right. Are puzzles or games an option? These allow the use of problem solving to share information, and they also spur creativity. So gamifying your approach, the observing and learning into games. What's interesting with the gamification approach is that learning happens primarily through observation and by doing. In the gaming world, it's not called learning, it's called onboarding. So onboarding is the use of videos and interactive examples that invite you and guide you into the land of the newbie. They rapidly develop your confidence and capability to take you to next levels of learning. So one of the ways I did this was by creating what I called the Amazing Classroom. This was based on research and experiential learning. The fun of escape rooms, those kind of things. And one of my favorite TV shows called The Amazing Race, where you have to solve clues and hopefully win $1 million. But what I wanted to do was focus on skills such as problem solving, teamwork, reading comprehension, and I'm an advocate for kinesthetic movement. When we can get up and move around the room, we do. Now this COVID situation is kind of putting a damper on my approach. But just think about using something like with an HR training rather than going page by page through a manual or whatever. Could you turn it into games? So I did this in a sports facilities class, and what you're seeing, I divided students up onto teams. I did it intentionally. I had information like personality profiles, things like that, to where I could try to divide my teams up evenly. They solved puzzles. It was a scenario. There was a bomb. They had to evacuate the sport facility safely. And of the three teams, I had one that did it. I gave them a time limit, and the red team saved the day. This was the first year I did it. The second year, I had nobody get even close to solving the puzzles and saving everyone. So we'll see as I keep trying whether it's effective or not. So the last thing I would like to say, and I don't have time to focus on this today, maybe Michelle will invite me back at a later time to discuss some things I'm researching now, is what is their first day experience like? And it's all about having defining moments. And so just think about that, and I may come back and ask you about that later. Okay. Last thing I would like to do, we're going to participate in an activity again, and I want us to brainstorm together. So during this session today, you did one activity that I call active learning, and that was perspective taking. Think, pair, share, where you shared with your neighbor, you maybe grappled with some ideas. I'm about to ask you to get up and move your body physically to take on this last activity. And then I try to keep my listening time frames to 20 minutes or less to accommodate a shorter attention span. So I may talk, then we do an activity, but I'm trying to break that up into 20-minute segments. So then you saw two examples from my sport management classes, the simulations and puzzles. So now I'm going to ask you guys to critically think together. So if you would go to your color-coded posters that match your sticky note color, I am then going to give you a task once you get to your groups. So if you would, go ahead and go to your groups right now. And here we will pause. Okay, so for equipping and engaging, whether it's Gen Z or multiple generations that you have in your workplace, try focusing on the visual aspects. For me, that meant changing even my PowerPoint presentations, to reducing the words, to increasing the visuals, because we remember pictures more than we do words. Reducing the listening time. Some people call this chunking, putting stuff together that you're learning about in smaller chunks and then breaking them up with activities. So those are the three things I encourage you to focus on and to think about. Again, to be a remixer is to see today's unprecedented generational change not as a challenge, but as an opportunity. Take advantage of the need to make changes as an opportunity to update things and engage not only Gen Z, but all of your workers as a whole. So I thank you for giving me your time today. I hope your multi-generational teams are effective, fun, and that you can find very interesting ways to engage and connect. And if you have any questions or follow up, please feel free to contact me. Again, I said email is my preferred. You can also follow the blog. It's a mix and match. Sometimes it's teaching strategies, sometimes it's Gen Z, sometimes it's just about communication. It's just whatever I happen to be researching at the time. So thank you again for your time today, and good luck with equipping and engaging Gen Z.